hadn't realized she had been staring. "Oh, just enjoying the conversation," she replied smoothly, though her voice felt too composed, too rehearsed. He chuckled, and the warmth of his gaze lingered. "You look like someone who sees more than she says." It was an odd statement, but it unsettled her. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening slightly around the glass. Richard, oblivious to the charged moment, jumped in. "Oh, Margaret sees everything. She just chooses when to chime in." His voice was light, affectionate, but she felt the weight of expectation in it, the role she was supposed to play. The steady wife, the polite hostess, the woman who never made waves. She smiled, as she always did, and took a sip of her wine. But as the night went on, she felt the spark of something she hadn't felt in years, something dangerous and exhilarating. Desire. Margaret told herself she was imagining it, that she had simply misread Daniel's friendliness, that it was nothing. But as they stood in the foyer saying their goodbyes, he leaned in, just slightly, just enough for his breath to brush her cheek. "It was a pleasure, Margaret," he murmured, his voice low. "I hope we get the chance to talk again." Her pulse stumbled, and just like that, her world, once so certain, shifted ever so slightly off balance. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the sound of Richard moving around their en-suite bathroom, the rhythmic shuffling of his slippers against the tiled floor, a familiar part of her mornings. She lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the previous night playing in her mind like a film on repeat. Daniel's voice still echoed in her head. "I hope we get the chance to talk again." It was nothing, she told herself. Just a passing moment of charm, the kind of polite farewell exchanged at dinner parties. And yet, the warmth of his gaze had lingered far longer than it should have. She forced herself to push it aside and went through the motions of her morning, slipping into her robe, brushing her hair, applying just a touch of lipstick enough to look polished but not overly made up. Richard was already at the breakfast table by the time she walked downstairs, reading the newspaper as he always did, coffee in one hand, toast in the other. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice measured neutral. He barely glanced up from the paper before nodding. "Oh, yes. Late night, though. I think everyone had a good time." She poured herself coffee, watching as the dark liquid filled the porcelain cup. "Yes," she said. "It was a nice evening." A safe response. A practiced response. Richard folded the newspaper and finally looked at her. "Daniel's a smart guy, don't you think?" Her fingers tightened around the handle of her cup. "Yes. He seems very self-assured." Richard chuckled. "He is. Some of the younger guys in the firm are either too eager or too timid. But Daniel has presence.